Jake's hand found mine in the darkness of the back office, his voice barely a whisper against my ear. "That's him, isn't it? Your ex." I couldn't answer at first because my throat had gone completely dry, my eyes locked on the security monitor mounted above the desk. There he was, Derek Chambers, table 12, the same table where he dumped me 2 years ago, and he was sitting there right now, laughing that obnoxious laugh I used to think was charming, his arm draped around some blonde woman's shoulders like he owned the world. He had no idea. None. The papers I'd signed that morning were still in my bag, ink barely dry, my hands still cramping from writing my signature approximately 47 times. $2.3 million. That's what Marcello's cost me. This restaurant. This beautiful, upscale Italian restaurant where I'd worked as a waitress for 6 years, where Derek used to sit at that exact booth and tell me I'd never amount to anything, where he'd brought another woman and humiliated me in front of everyone I worked with. And now I owned it. Every table, every bottle of wine in the cellar, every square inch of marble flooring. I owned the building. I owned the business. I owned the reputation. And Derek Chambers, who'd once told me I'd never be more than a waitress, was about to have the worst dinner of his entire privileged, condescending life. Jake squeezed my hand tighter, and I could feel him watching my face, probably wondering if I was about to cry or scream or do something crazy. I wasn't. I was calm, calmer than I'd been in years, actually. Because what happened next, in the following 2 hours, made the $2.3 million purchase price absolutely worth it. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. 5 years ago, I was a completely different person. Actually, that's not true. I was the same person, just smaller somehow, like I'd been living in a box I didn't even know I'd built around myself. I was 24, working double shifts at Marcello's, taking my MBA classes at night, surviving on coffee and spite and the desperate hope that someday my life would be more than aching feet and the smell of garlic bread embedded in my hair. Derek started coming in every Thursday night, always requesting my section, always ordering the same thing: 16-ounce ribeye, medium rare, and a $50 bottle of wine he'd nurse for 2 hours while he worked on his laptop. He was a hedge fund analyst, which I learned approximately 8 seconds after meeting him because he told everyone within a 5-mile radius. Designer suits, expensive watch, that particular brand of confidence that comes from never being told no in your entire life. And he pursued me, relentlessly. Flowers sent to the restaurant, notes left with his credit card receipt. "Dinner? Somewhere you don't have to serve me?" written in neat handwriting on the back of his business card. I said no 3 times because I had a rule about dating customers, and also because something about his smile felt calculated, like he'd practiced it in the mirror. But he wore me down, and honestly, I was flattered. This successful, handsome man who could probably date anyone wanted me? The waitress with student loans and a studio apartment where the shower only worked if you kicked it twice? It felt like winning something. The first 6 months were perfect, or at least they seemed perfect, which I've learned is not the same thing at all. He took me to nice restaurants where I didn't have to look at the prices. He introduced me to his friends, brought me to company events, made me feel like I was part of this sophisticated world I'd only ever observed from the other side of the serving tray. I thought I was Cinderella. Turns out I was just auditioning for the role of his accessory. The cracks started showing around month 7, subtle at first, like hairline fractures in expensive china. Derek started making little comments about my job, always with this indulgent smile, like he was talking to a child. "It's cute that you're ambitious. But let's be realistic, Sarah. How many waitresses actually finish their MBAs?" He said it while scrolling through his phone, not even looking at me, like it was just an objective observation and not a knife between my ribs. When I got excited about a strategy class I was taking, he'd nod absently and change the subject to his work, his deals, his brilliant, analysis that saved his firm millions. My accomplishments became cute. His were world-changing. He started suggesting I should quit school, focus on supporting his career, since he was going places, and wouldn't it be better if one of us had a flexible schedule? The worst part was when he'd bring his colleagues to Marcello's, specifically requesting my section, and I'd have to serve them, while Derek introduced me with this patronizing smirk. "This is my girlfriend, Sarah. She works here." Not "she's getting her MBA" or "she's brilliant" with numbers, or literally anything else. Just "she works here," with the emphasis that made it clear he thought I'd never work anywhere else. His friends would look at me with this mixture of pity and amusement, like I was Derek's charity case, his walk on the wild side before he settled down with someone appropriate. I started feeling smaller every day, like I was shrinking into myself, my dreams getting quieter because they sounded so stupid when Derek raised his eyebrows at them. But I loved him, or I thought I did, or maybe I just loved the idea of being loved by someone like him. I told myself he'd change, that once he saw how hard I was working, once I proved myself, he'd respect me. I made excuses when my friends asked why I seemed different. I tolerated it because leaving felt worse than staying, and isn't that just the saddest thing? By month 10, Derek wasn't even pretending to be nice anymore. He criticized everything. My clothes were too cheap for the places he took me. My friends were towny trash who'd keep me stuck in mediocrity. My family was well-meaning but simple. He had opinions about my hair, my makeup, the way I laughed too loudly at jokes. One night, I came to his apartment straight from a double shift, exhausted and excited to see him, and he actually wrinkled his nose and said, "You smell like garlic and desperation, Sarah. Can you at least shower before you come over?" I should have left right then. I should have thrown his spare key at his face and walked out. But I didn't. I apologized. I actually apologized for smelling like the honest work that paid my bills, and I went home feeling like something stuck to his shoe. He had this way of making me feel lucky, like I'd won some cosmic lottery by being with him, like I should be grateful he was willing to overlook my obvious inadequacies. When I got accepted to Wharton's MBA program, Wharton, which has a 4% acceptance rate, I was shaking when I showed him the letter. I thought maybe this would finally make him proud. He barely looked at it. "That's a waste of time and money," he said, turning back to his laptop. "You're never going to out-earn me anyway, so why bother? You'd be better off focusing on us." Us, like we were a team, like he wasn't actively dismantling every piece of my self-worth. My self-esteem didn't plummet. It free fell. I stopped looking in mirrors. I stopped calling my friends. I made myself smaller and quieter and more convenient because some broken part of me believed I needed him. My mom asked me at Thanksgiving why I seemed dimmed, why I wasn't talking about school anymore. My sister pulled me aside and said, "He's not good for you." I made excuses. "He's just stressed. He doesn't mean it like that. You don't understand him like I do." All the greatest hits of a woman convincing herself that staying was brave instead of what it actually was. Terrifying. 2 years ago, Derek ended it. Not with a phone call or a private conversation or even the basic human decency of breaking up with me somewhere I could cry in peace. No, Derek Chambers dumped me at Marcello's during my Friday night shift at table 12. I saw him walk in with her, Amanda, his co-worker, the one he'd always said was just a friend. And something in my stomach turned to ice. He requested my section, specifically requested me. I walked over with my order pad, professional smile plastered on, thinking maybe I was being paranoid, maybe this was some weird coincidence. It wasn't. Derek looked up at me with this smirk, this satisfied little smile, like he'd been planning this moment for weeks, and said, "Sarah, we need to talk. I'm ending things. You'll never be more than a waitress. I need someone with ambition, someone who matches my level." Just like that, in front of Amanda, who had the decency to look uncomfortable, in front of the table next to them, who went silent, in front of Marco, the owner, who was seating guests nearby, in front of Jenny, my co-worker, who actually gasped. He said it like he was ordering an appetizer, casual and final, and then he turned to Amanda and asked if she wanted to split the calamari. I stood there, order pad shaking in my hand, unable to breathe or think or do anything except try not to cry in the middle of the dining room. I took their order. I actually took their order because I needed this job and I couldn't afford to make a scene, and I served them their food and brought their wine and smiled through the entire nightmare while Derek laughed and touched Amanda's hand across the table. The bill was $300. He left $5. Five. The worst part wasn't even the tip, though that was objectively insulting. The worst part was walking into the break room afterward and seeing the pity on everyone's faces, knowing they'd all witness my humiliation, knowing the story would spread through the entire staff by morning. I cried in the walk-in freezer for 20 minutes. And then I finished my shift because that's what waitresses do. I called in sick for 3 days, which I'd never done in 6 years of working at Marcello's, and I cried. Not pretty crying, not dignified crying, but the kind of ugly, snotty, hyperventilating crying where you can't catch your breath and your face swells up like a balloon. I cried in bed, I cried in the shower, I cried while eating cereal directly from the box at 3 in the morning. I replayed every moment, every insult, every time I'd made myself smaller, and I felt pathetic and stupid and exactly like the person Derek had always said I was. On day 4, Rachel showed up at my apartment with a bottle of wine and the kind of expression that meant she wasn't leaving until I pulled myself together. She sat on my couch, poured 2 enormous glasses, and said, "Okay, you've cried. You're allowed to cry. But now you need to listen to me." I tried to interrupt, to explain how humiliated I felt, how right Derek was about everything, and Rachel held up her hand. "He was always wrong about you, Sarah. Always. And you know what you're going to do now? You're going to prove it." Something shifted in that moment, like a switch flipping in my brain. Rachel was right. Derek was wrong. He'd always been wrong, and I'd wasted 2 years believing his version of me instead of my own. That night, I opened my laptop and looked at my MBA coursework with new eyes. I wasn't doing this to impress anyone anymore. I was doing it to become the person I'd always been underneath all of Derek's criticism. I threw myself into school with fury-fueled determination, channeling every single insult into motivation. "You'll never be more than a waitress" became my mantra, except I twisted it into fuel. Every time I wanted to quit, I heard his voice, and it made me work harder. I stopped apologizing for my ambition. I stopped making myself smaller in study groups. I raised my hand in class. I networked aggressively. I let myself be smart and driven and hungry for success, and it felt like finally breathing after being underwater for 2 years. Turns out, when you stop trying to be small, you discover you were actually meant to take up space. I excelled in my MBA program. Not just passed, not just did well, I dominated. My strategy professor, Dr. Chen, pulled me aside after I presented a case analysis on restaurant turnarounds and said, "You see things other students miss. Why is that?" I told her about my 6 years at Marcello's, how I'd watched thousands of customers, tracked what sold and what didn't, understood the razor-thin margins and the chaos of kitchen operations and the make-or-break importance of staff retention. She nodded slowly, and 2 weeks later, she connected me with Catalyst Ventures, a venture capital firm specializing in hospitality investments. They were looking for an analyst who actually understood restaurants from the inside, not just the spreadsheets. I interviewed on a Tuesday, got hired by Friday, and suddenly my "just a waitress" background wasn't a liability anymore. It was my secret weapon. While my colleagues had business degrees and theories, I had reality. I knew which restaurants were lying on their books because I'd seen how they treated staff. I knew which concepts would fail because I understood what customers actually wanted versus what owners thought they wanted. I could walk into a restaurant and know within 20 minutes if it was salvageable. My first investment recommendation was a struggling Italian place in Brooklyn. My team was skeptical, but I saw what they didn't. Excellent bones, terrible management, fixable problems. We bought in. I helped restructure operations using everything I'd learned from watching Marco run Marcello's, and 6 months later, we sold our stake for 3 times what we paid. My second investment did even better. Then my third. I was good at this, really good. The broke waitress Derek had dumped was making 6 figures and building a portfolio that would make him physically ill if he knew about it. But he didn't know because I'd blocked him everywhere and we had 0 mutual friends anymore. I heard through the restaurant grapevine that he was still at the same hedge fund, still dating Amanda, still probably being insufferable. I didn't care. I was too busy becoming exactly who I was always meant to be. Over the next 18 months, I built what my accountant diplomatically called a small fortune and what I privately thought of as my fuck you fund. I identified undervalued restaurants, helped turn them around, using my insider knowledge and actual respect for the people doing the work, then sold my stakes for significant returns. Catalyst gave me more autonomy, bigger deals, a percentage of the profits. My bank account grew in a way that would have seemed impossible when I was living on tips and ramen. But here's the thing, I kept a low profile. I didn't buy a flashy car or move to some luxury apartment or post about my success on social media. I kept my same studio with the temperamental shower. I still shopped at Target. I saved aggressively, invested carefully, and lived like I was still making waitress money because I remembered what being broke felt like and I never wanted to feel that vulnerable again. Derek had no idea about any of it. We had 0 mutual friends anymore. I'd let those relationships die when he'd isolated me, and I'd built a completely new circle. I'd blocked him on everything 2 years ago, and he clearly hadn't cared enough to wonder what happened to me. Through the restaurant industry grapevine, I heard things occasionally. He was still at the same hedge fund, still driving the same pretentious car, still being arrogant at business dinners. He'd gotten engaged to Amanda about 6 months after dumping me, which honestly just confirmed what I already knew about the timeline of that relationship. Good for them, I thought, and I genuinely meant it because I'd stopped caring. He was a chapter I'd closed, a lesson I'd learned, a mistake I'd survived. My therapist said I'd processed the trauma and emerged stronger, which was a fancy way of saying I'd turned my pain into profit and my humiliation into motivation. I wasn't the same person he'd dated. I wasn't even in the same universe as that person. And the best part? He was about to find that out in the most spectacular way possible. I found out about Marcello's being for sale through the most mundane possible channel, an industry newsletter that landed in my inbox on a Wednesday morning. Marcello's, established 1987, available for acquisition. Owner retiring. Serious inquiries only. I stared at that email for probably 10 minutes straight, my coffee going cold, my heart doing something complicated in my chest. Marco was selling. The restaurant. The place where I'd spent 6 years, where I'd learned everything about hospitality, where I'd been dumped and humiliated and told I'd never be more than a waitress. The asking price was 2.3 million, which was ambitious but not unreasonable for an established restaurant in that location with Marcello's reputation. I did the math immediately because that's who I am now. I ran projections, calculated the capital I had available, figured out financing options, analyzed 3 years of comparable sales in the area. It was feasible, ambitious, definitely a stretch, but feasible. I could actually do this. But the analysis wasn't what made my hands shake. It was the want. I wanted this restaurant, not just as some trophy or revenge plot, though I'd be lying if I said that wasn't part of it. I wanted it because I loved Marcello's. I loved the exposed brick walls and the wine cellar Marco had built himself and the way the kitchen smelled at 5 a.m. when the bread was baking. I had ideas, so many ideas about how to make it even better, while honoring what made it special. Better wages for staff, profit sharing, modernized systems that didn't lose the old world charm. This could be my legacy, the thing I built, proof that the girl everyone underestimated knew exactly what she was doing. I called my financial advisor, then my banker, then Catalyst's managing partner. By Friday, I had my financing lined up and a meeting scheduled with Marco for the following Tuesday. I made my offer on Wednesday, asking price, all cash, 30-day, close. Marco looked at me across his desk with tears in his eyes and said, "Sarah, I was hoping it would be you." Marco had hired a restaurant consultant to evaluate all the offers and ensure the transition would be smooth, and that's how I met Jake Torres. He walked into the first negotiation meeting with this calm, observant energy, like he was cataloging everything without making you feel scrutinized. He asked me questions nobody else had, not just about my financing or my experience, but about my vision for Marcello's, what I wanted to preserve, what I wanted to change. When I explained my ideas about staff profit sharing and modernizing inventory systems while keeping the soul of the place intact, he actually smiled and said, "You get it. Most buyers just see dollar signs. You see people." Something in my chest loosened. Over the next 3 weeks of due diligence and negotiations, Jake and I spent hours together reviewing operations, walking through scenarios, talking about the restaurant industry and life and everything in between. He was kind and brilliant and genuinely excited about my plans. And he never once made me feel like I needed to prove myself or apologize for my ambition. When I mentioned I'd worked at Marcello's as a waitress, he said, "That makes you more qualified, not less." We started dating somewhere between the liquor license transfer and the final contract review. I'm not even sure who made the first move, just that one night we were having dinner to discuss vendor contracts, and the next we were having dinner because we wanted to be together. For the first time in years, I felt seen, actually seen, and valued for exactly who I was. Jake knew about Derek because I told him everything one night over wine, needing him to understand why this purchase meant so much. He didn't tell me to let it go or move on or that I was being vindictive. He just squeezed my hand and said, "You're not buying this restaurant because of him. You're buying it despite him. There's a difference." The deal closed on a Friday morning, 47 signatures later, and I walked out of that lawyer's office as the owner of Marcello's. Jake kissed me in the parking lot and said, "Congratulations, boss." I'd never been happier. I didn't tell anyone except Jake and Rachel about the purchase. I wanted to surprise the staff on Monday morning, walk in as their new boss, and hopefully not their last boss. Someone who actually understood what they dealt with every shift. The closing was Friday morning, and I planned to spend the weekend at the restaurant reviewing operations, going through Marco's files, preparing for the transition. I was in my apartment Friday evening, making notes about my first staff meeting, when my phone buzzed. "Jake, you need to see this." Then a screenshot of the reservation system. My hands started shaking before my brain fully processed what I was looking at. Saturday night, 7 p.m., table 12, party of 2. Name, Derek Chambers. I stared at that screenshot until the words stopped making sense, until they were just shapes on a screen. And then I read it again to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Derek had made a reservation at Marcello's, at my restaurant, the restaurant I now owned. Table 12, the same table where he'd dumped me, where he'd humiliated me, where he'd left that $5 tip like a final insult. And he had no idea, no possible way of knowing. We hadn't spoken in 2 years. We had no mutual connections. My purchase hadn't been announced publicly yet. He was just making a reservation at a restaurant he liked, probably to impress whatever woman he was dating now, completely oblivious to the fact that the waitress he'd destroyed now owned the place. The universe had just handed me the most beautiful coincidence I'd ever experienced. My phone rang. Jake calling. "Are you seeing this?" he asked. "I'm seeing it," I said, my voice weirdly calm, considering my hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped the phone. "What are you going to do?" What was I going to do? I looked at that screenshot again, at Derek's name in the reservation system of my restaurant, and something that felt like vindication mixed with absolute chaos flooded through me. I'm going to let him come, I said. And then I'm going to introduce myself as the owner. Jake came over within an hour, and we sat on my couch formulating a plan, like we were planning a heist instead of a dinner service. The beautiful thing about owning a restaurant is that you control everything: the atmosphere, the timing, the narrative. We decided I'd stay in the back office during Derek's meal, watching through the security monitors like some kind of restaurant guardian angel, except I was definitely not angelic about this. I'd let him have his dinner, let him order his expensive wine, let him feel superior and important and completely in control. Let him probably make some snide comment to whatever woman he was with about the staff or the service or knowing the place back when. Let him be Derek, essentially, which meant letting him be awful. Then, at the perfect moment, maybe after appetizers, maybe after the main course, I hadn't decided yet, I'd walk out of that office in my best suit and introduce myself as the new owner. Simple, clean, devastating. Jake listened to all of this and then said very carefully, "You need to be prepared for him to cause a scene. Derek doesn't strike me as someone who handles humiliation well." I laughed. Actually laughed because that was possibly the understatement of the century. "Jake, I'm counting on it. Let him cause a scene. Let him yell or make a fool of himself or whatever he needs to do. I own the restaurant. I can have him removed if necessary. But he needs to know that the woman he said would never be more than a waitress just became his boss in the most literal way possible." Jake studied my face for a long moment, probably trying to determine if I was being vindictive or self-destructive or just plain crazy, and then he smiled. "Okay, but I'm staying with you in that office. Someone needs to make sure you don't murder him. And also someone needs to record this because it's going to be spectacular." We spent the rest of the night going over every detail, every possible scenario, every exit strategy if things went sideways. By midnight, I wasn't nervous anymore. I was ready. I arrived at Marcello's at 5 p.m., 2 hours before Derek's reservation, my heart doing this weird arrhythmic thing where it would race and then stop and then race again. Jake met me at the back entrance with coffee and the kind of steady presence that kept me from either throwing up or chickening out entirely. We settled into the office, lights off, security monitors glowing in the darkness like we were running some kind of surveillance operation. At 6:58 p.m., Derek walked through the front door. Not with Amanda. With a different woman. Brunette, younger, wearing a dress that probably cost more than my first car. So he'd moved on from his co-worker fiancée, apparently, which tracked because Derek collected women like some people collected wine. He was loud immediately, his voice carrying across the dining room as he told his date some story that required expansive hand gestures. The host seated them at table 12, exactly as reserved, and I watched Derek settle into that booth like he was sitting on a throne. My blood started simmering, then it started boiling, because Derek was exactly as awful as I remembered, possibly worse. He snapped his fingers, at Marcus, one of our busboys, demanding water with extra ice and make sure the glass is actually clean this time. He sent back the wine twice, claiming it was corked when it absolutely wasn't, just being difficult because he could be. He interrupted his server mid-sentence to change his order, then changed it again, then acted like she was incompetent for not reading his mind. The staff tolerated it because that's what servers do. We smile and accommodate and swallow our dignity because we need our jobs. They had no idea. I own this place now. No idea that every rude comment and dismissive gesture was being catalogued by someone who could actually do something about it. Jake's hand found mine in the darkness. "Wait for the right moment," he whispered, probably sensing that I was approximately 3 seconds from storming out there. I took a breath, then another, Derek was halfway through his appetizer, laughing too loudly, touching his date's hand across the table. He had no idea what was coming. None at all. Derek was on his third glass of wine, getting louder with each sip, his voice carrying across the dining room like he wanted an audience. His date said something about the restaurant being beautiful, asking how he knew about it, and I watched Derek lean back in the booth with this self-satisfied expression that made me want to reach through the monitor and strangle him. "I used to date a waitress here," he said, loud enough that the neighboring tables could definitely hear. "Pathetic girl, no ambition. I had to dump her because she was going nowhere." His date laughed, this tinkling sound that probably seemed charming to her, but sounded like nails on a chalkboard to me. Maria, who was serving their table, Maria, who'd worked alongside me for 4 years, who'd witnessed my humiliation 2 years ago, went completely still, her hand frozen while refilling their water glasses. Derek didn't notice or didn't care. "Girls like that never change," he continued, swirling his wine like some kind of connoisseur of human worth. "She's probably still slinging pasta somewhere. Still broke, still going nowhere. I dodged a bullet with that one." I felt Jake's hand tighten on mine, felt him shift like he was preparing to physically restrain me if necessary, but I was completely calm now, that crystalline kind of calm that comes right before you do something that can't be undone. Derek had just given me the perfect opening, the absolute ideal moment, and I was going to take it with both hands. This wasn't about revenge anymore, if it ever really was. This was about correcting the record, about showing him exactly how wrong he'd been, about standing up for every person he'd ever looked down on and dismissed and underestimated. Maria caught the eye of another server, jerking her head toward table 12 with an expression that clearly communicated what a nightmare this guy was. Derek's date was nodding sympathetically, buying every word of his fictional version of me, and I stood up. "That's the moment," I said to Jake, smoothing down my suit jacket. "Right now. I'm going out there right now." I walked out of that office in my best suit, the navy Tom Ford I'd bought specifically for closing day, tailored perfectly, expensive enough that you could tell just by looking at it. My heels clicked across the floor with purpose, each step steady and deliberate. And I went straight to table 12 without hesitation or doubt or any of the smallness I used to carry around Derek. He didn't recognize me at first. His eyes slid over me the way people look at restaurant management, politely curious, maybe worried he was about to get complaints about being too loud. I watched the moment of non-recognition, savored it, let it stretch out for just a second longer than comfortable. Then I spoke. "Hello, Derek." His head snapped up. He blinked, his wine glass frozen halfway to his mouth. His brain clearly trying to reconcile the polished, confident woman standing at his table with whatever diminished version of me he'd been carrying around in his memory. "Sarah?" He said my name like a question, like he wasn't entirely sure I was real. I smiled, and it was not a warm smile, not even close. "Welcome to my restaurant," I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet dining room, because yes, people were absolutely listening now. "I bought it this morning. Well, technically, I closed on Friday morning, but I signed the papers at 9 a.m., so let's call it this morning for dramatic effect." The color drained from Derek's face so fast I thought he might actually pass out. His date looked between us, confused, her smile faltering. The tables near us had gone completely silent, forks suspended mid-air, conversations dying as people tuned into the drama unfolding at table 12. "You... what?" Derek stammered, and I'd never heard him stammer before. "You bought... Marcello's. Yes, I own it. Every table, every bottle in the cellar, every square inch of this building. I'm the owner." I let that sink in, watched it register, watched him process the fact that the pathetic waitress he'd just been mocking to his date was now his boss, in the most literal sense possible. Derek sputtered, actually sputtered, his composure completely shattered. "Your restaurant? What are you talking about? This is... you can't..." He was flailing, grasping for words, and I just stood there calm and collected while he unraveled. "Let me explain," I said, my voice steady and clear enough that I knew the tables around us could hear every word. "After you dumped me, I finished my MBA. Wharton, actually. Then I got hired by Catalyst Ventures as a restaurant industry analyst. Turns out, all those years of being just a waitress gave me insight that your fancy hedge fund colleagues don't have. I've spent the last 18 months identifying undervalued restaurants, turning them around, and making strategic investments. I bought Marcello's for $2.3 million, all approved financing, completely legitimate. So when you said 30 seconds ago that I'm probably still slinging pasta somewhere, you were wrong. I'm the owner." Derek's face cycled through emotions like a slot machine. Disbelief, then embarrassment, then this ugly red rage that started at his collar and crept up his neck. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice getting louder. "You're lying. This is some kind of—" I pulled out my phone, already cued to the PDF of the signed purchase agreement, and held it in front of his face. 47 signatures, all legal, all official, all mine. "Would you like me to email you a copy?" I asked sweetly. His date shifted in her seat, her expression morphing from confused to uncomfortable to something that looked like she was calculating escape routes. She glanced around at the other diners, all of whom had completely abandoned any pretense of not watching this unfold. A woman at the next table had her phone out, probably recording. An older couple near the window were whispering to each other, eyes wide. Maria stood near the kitchen, hand over her mouth, and I caught her eye for just a second and saw something like vindication reflected back at me. Derek grabbed for my phone and I pulled it back smoothly. "Don't touch what's not yours, Derek. I thought you understood the concept of ownership." Derek's brain seemed to reboot, and he tried a different tactic, forcing his face into something that might have been a smile if it wasn't so strained. "Well, good for you, Sarah. Really, I always knew you had it in you. I was just trying to motivate you. You know how I am." My laugh cut him off, cold and sharp. "No, you didn't. You literally called me pathetic 30 seconds ago. You said I was going nowhere, that girls like me never change, that you dodged a bullet. Your date heard it. I heard it through the security monitor in my office. Half this dining room heard it because you were broadcasting it like a podcast." His date's eyes went wide, her hand slowly moving toward her purse. She was putting pieces together now, realizing she was on a date with a man who mocked his ex-girlfriends in public, who treated staff like garbage, who was currently being confronted by a woman he'd clearly underestimated catastrophically. Derek stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loud against the floor, and suddenly he was looming over me, trying to use his height as intimidation. "You're embarrassing yourself, Sarah. This is pathetic. Making a scene, trying to humiliate me because you're still bitter." I didn't flinch, didn't step back, didn't give him an inch. "Actually, Derek, I'm asking you to leave. You're banned from my establishment. Permanently." His face turned purple, an actual purple, like a cartoon character about to explode. "You can't do that. You can't just ban me. This is a public restaurant." "I literally can," I said, my voice still calm, still steady, and that seemed to enrage him more than if I'd yelled. "I own this place. I make the rules, and one of my rules is that people who snap their fingers at my staff, send back perfectly good wine to feel important, and talk about women like they're disposable don't get to eat here, so you need to leave. Now." Derek looked around wildly, like he expected someone to intervene, to tell me I was being unreasonable. Nobody did. His date was already standing, her purse clutched to her chest. Maria had disappeared, probably to get Jake or security. Derek lost it completely. He started yelling, his voice echoing off the exposed brick walls, loud enough that the kitchen staff probably heard every word. "This is vindictive. This is harassment. You can't do this to me. I'll sue you. I'll have your business license revoked. You're just a bitter ex who can't handle that I moved on." That's when Jake emerged from the back, and I'd never been more grateful for his presence. He's 6'2" and calm, in a way that's somehow more intimidating than aggression, and he walked straight to table 12 and stood next to me, not touching, just there. "Sir, you need to leave," Jake said, his voice level. Derek whirled on him. "Who the hell are you?" "Restaurant consultant and her boyfriend. Security's on their way. You can leave voluntarily, or you can be escorted, but either way, you're leaving." I'd made sure security was on standby, had texted them the second I walked out of the office, and they appeared now from the front entrance. Two large, professional men who did not look sympathetic to Derek's tantrum. The other diners weren't even pretending not to watch anymore. Phones were out, multiple people were filming, and I had the distant thought that this was going to be all over social media by morning. Derek's date grabbed her purse and coat, muttered, "I'm sorry," in my direction, not to Derek, to me, and walked out without looking back. That seemed to snap something in Derek. He lunged toward me, not to hit, but to intimidate, and Jake stepped between us immediately, while security moved in. "Get your hands off me," Derek yelled as they took his arms, professional and firm. "This is assault. I'm calling the police. Sarah, you're going to regret this. You're going to—" They escorted him toward the door, Derek still yelling threats and insults, his voice getting farther away, and then finally, blessedly, silent as the door closed behind him. I stood there shaking, adrenaline crashing through my system, Jake's hand finding mine, and then someone started clapping. The woman at the next table, the one who'd been recording. Then the older couple by the window joined in. Then Maria and the other servers. Then the entire restaurant was applauding, and I started crying right there, in the middle of my dining room. By Sunday morning, the video was everywhere. Entitled "X Gets Banned from Restaurant by Woman He Mocked," had 3 million views on TikTok, 2 million on Twitter, countless shares on Facebook. Someone had caught the entire confrontation. Derek's face going purple, me standing calm and collected, security escorting him out while he screamed threats. The internet did what the internet does. They found out who he was, where he worked, his entire employment history. By Monday afternoon, Derek's hedge fund had put him on administrative leave pending investigation, because apparently treating people like garbage doesn't look great when it's broadcast to millions. Turns out companies care about reputation when it's public. Tuesday morning, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line said, "Thank you." It was Amanda, Derek's ex-fiancée, the woman he'd left me for. "I saw the video," she wrote. "He did the same thing to me, made me feel small, criticized everything, then dumped me at a company event 6 months ago. Watching you stand up to him was the most cathartic thing I've ever witnessed. You're my hero." I cried reading that, understanding that Derek's cruelty wasn't personal, it was just who he was, and I'd been lucky to escape. Monday morning, I'd gathered the Marcello staff before opening and announced the ownership change. There was shocked silence, then questions, then Maria started crying and hugged me, and suddenly everyone was talking at once. I told them about my plans, better wages, profit sharing, respect as the foundation of everything we'd build. They were thrilled. The viral video had an unexpected side effect. Business absolutely exploded. We were booked solid for 6 weeks straight. People wanted to eat at the restaurant where that woman had stood up to her terrible ex. They wanted to support a business owner who defended her staff. Revenue doubled, then tripled. I hired more servers, expanded the kitchen staff, gave everyone raises. The story had a life of its own now, completely beyond Derek or me. It became about something bigger, standing up to people who diminish you, proving wrong everyone who underestimated you, building something meaningful from pain. 6 months later, I'm standing in Marcello's on a busy Saturday night, watching the dining room hum with that perfect energy that means everything's working, and I barely think about Derek anymore. The restaurant is thriving in ways I couldn't have imagined. We implemented profit sharing last month, and the staff actually cried during the announcement. Everyone makes a living wage now, not survival money, but actual living money, and the culture is built on respect, instead of fear. Jake and I are serious, the kind of serious where we're looking at apartments together and talking about futures, and I don't feel scared anymore. I heard through the grapevine that Derek lost his hedge fund job permanently, couldn't find another position because the video made him unemployable in finance, and had to move back in with his parents at 34. I should probably feel bad about that. I don't. Not even a little bit. Because the best revenge wasn't getting him banned, or watching him get escorted out, or even the viral video, though those were satisfying. The best revenge was building exactly the life he said I'd never have, becoming exactly the person he said I'd never be, and doing it without thinking about him at all. He's irrelevant now, a footnote in my origin story, the villain who accidentally motivated the hero. I catch my reflection in the bar mirror sometimes, and I don't recognize the woman looking back, not because I've changed, but because I finally look like myself, the small, apologetic girl who believed she'd never be more than a waitress is gone, and in her place is someone who owns the restaurant, who employs 32 people, who took every insult and transformed it into fuel. Maria walks past with a tray of appetizers and grins at me. A couple at table 12, yes, that table 12, are celebrating an anniversary. Jake texts me from the office. "Revenue's up again. You're killing it." And I stand there, in my restaurant, in my success, in my peace, and I finally feel free. So tell me, did I go too far or not far enough? Let me know.